What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. And today's case legitimately feels like something out of a movie. So buckle in. It's a long ride. There's a lot to digest here. Let's go ahead and dive right in. In Denver, Colorado, back in 2011, 19-year-old Kenia Monge, a bright and beautiful college student, vanished during a night out with friends. Her disappearance left a trail of unanswered questions, a heartbroken family, and honestly horrifying details that opened up these endless possibilities. Her family and authorities started to uncover this mystery involving a sketchy white van, which is never a good sign, several questionable men, and a strange text from an unknown number. However, the truth behind her disappearance was far more sinister than I think anyone could have ever imagined. What had begun as a missing persons case quickly transformed into a complex and disturbing homicide investigation. Her loved ones were clinging to hope as detectives were navigating this web of lies spun by someone claiming to be a good Samaritan. A good Samaritan with all the red flags of a potential serial killer. This case is so frustrating. Every single turn it seems there is a moment that this could have been stopped, when Kenia could have been helped, when future victims, because yes, there were future victims, could have been spared, but unfortunately it just didn't happen. And so if this video serves as anything, I hope it's a reminder that we have to do better for ourselves and each other. We have to protect each other. You never know who people truly are. You never know when things can go horribly wrong. And with that being said, let's jump right into the details. Kenia Monge was born in Honduras on January 26, 1992, to her mother, Maria, who was only 15 years old at the time. And so being a 15-year-old new mom, there was a lot she was facing, a lot of challenges. She was trying to tackle motherhood. She also had these hopes for a better future for herself and her daughter, but she had to come to terms with the reality that those opportunities, things that she wanted, just didn't exist in Honduras. So as she's raising Kenia, about a year after Kenia was born, she made a very difficult decision that she hoped would improve both of their lives. Maria decided to leave Kenia in the care of her grandmother in Honduras, and she herself headed to the United States on her own. Something that I can only imagine was terrifying and so exciting all at the same time. So she went to the United States with a goal. She wanted to create a stable environment, get a job and a home, and then when the time was right, bring Kenia into this new world of theirs. So years passed and Maria worked tirelessly in America to make this dream a reality. And she wasn't doing it alone. She ended up meeting and falling in love with a man named Tony Lee, who without hesitation stepped into Kenia's life as her father, and together they went on to have two more children, Kim and Anthony. And so in 2004, after years of work and anticipation, it was time to bring 12-year-old Kenia home. She left her childhood home in Honduras and boarded a plane to her new life in Aurora, Colorado. Now, this transition, as I'm sure you can imagine, was not without challenges. Kenia was now adjusting to a new culture, a new way of life, new surroundings. She also spoke very little English when she arrived, but if Kenia was anything, it was resilient and adaptable. She was a very fast learner, much like her mother. And so she was eager to embrace these new opportunities ahead of her. And of course, she also had the unwavering support of her family. And so Kenia pretty easily found her footing. She excelled in school and seamlessly integrated into American life. Her family life was incredibly strong. She had become inseparable from her little sister, Kim. This was everything that she and her mom had always hoped for. And Kenia continued to excel. Throughout her teens, she was known for her outgoing personality. She was loyal, sweet, smart, friendly, and most of all, Kenia was tough. She had overcome so much, and she stood strong in who she was, where she came from, who she hoped to be, and she knew how much effort her mom had put into this, and so she never took anything at all for granted. Kenia was ready to take on her young adult life. She eventually graduated from Cherry Hill High School, and she set her sights on a career in broadcasting. She wanted to be on television. She wanted to share her voice and her passions with the world. So after graduation, she started attending a local school to earn her degree, and she even moved away from home to live with her longtime boyfriend. And this brings us to April 1st, 2011. Kenia had gone out the night before with a group of friends. Typically, she got home safe and sound. She was great about communication. She was responsible, but this time was different. The morning of the first rolled around, and her friends, her family, her boyfriend, no one could get a hold of her. And as I said, she was usually the one who was always reaching out, speaking to everyone. She spoke to her sister Kim several times a day, but that entire morning into the afternoon, Kim hadn't heard from Kenia. And as hours passed and Kenia still failed to pop up anywhere, her parents, Tony and Maria, started to reach out to anyone they could to figure out where Kenia was. And this led them to her friends that she had likely gone out with the night before, because at this point, no one seemed really sure what Kenia had done, where she went, exactly who she went with. Everything was up in the air, and it was just silence on her end. Kenia's friends explained to a shocked Tony and Maria that they had all decided to go to downtown Denver the night before to experience some of the nightlife. And with their fake IDs in hand, including Kenia, they had tried to get into a few bars. Now, apparently the bouncers saw their IDs and were not buying it at all, and Kenia ended up going off with a few other friends that she wasn't nearly as close with. This is like a secondary friend group that she had. And from that point on, her regular group of friends didn't hear from her again. Now, Kenia had a pretty good set of rules with this close-knit group of friends that she had. No one got left behind. No one went off in the clubs on their own. They protected each other, but clearly those rules didn't seem to be in place with these other friends. These were, I think, 2 girls or so that no one really knew well, including Kenia. They'd never met her family. It was just completely different from the people that she usually would hang out with. And so Tony and Maria and everyone else in Kenia's life were incredibly worried about what may have happened to Kenia the night before. As a 19-year-old girl, underage, illegally getting into bars, there's no telling what could have happened. So Tony and Maria decided to contact the last people Kenia was with to try and get answers. And when these friends arrived at the Monge home, to everyone's shock and horror, they arrived with all of Kenia's closest personal belongings. Now, initially, these friends didn't want to admit anything that had happened. It seems they didn't want to say they were out clubbing. They didn't want to admit they had fake IDs. I don't think they were really grasping the reality of the situation. And so Tony had to kind of like shake them out of it and say, hey, Kenia is missing. We cannot find her. You have all of her belongings. We need to know what happened. And so finally, they started to fess up. So according to these friends, they had gone with Kenia to a small club called 24K on Market Street. And while they were there, Kenia became incredibly intoxicated. Now, she was only 4'11". She weighed barely 100 pounds, so it really didn't take much for her to get to that point. She was off doing her thing, and she had been dancing with one particular guy. They said that while she was out having a good time at the bar, she had left all of her belongings behind at the table they had been at. So her phone, her wallet, her car keys, everything. And the last time they remembered seeing her was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. But by the time the bar began to close, they were waiting there, waiting for her to come get her stuff. Everyone was waiting to leave, but Kenia never came back. She never came back to get her things. And when they searched the bar, she was nowhere inside, not in the bathroom, nowhere. And so at this point, instead of doing anything, contacting anyone, trying to figure out what was going on, her friends made the assumption that she had left maybe with that guy or maybe with her other friends. They didn't know. And so they simply gathered all of her belongings and headed home themselves. So as I've already stated, all of this information was shocking for Maria and Tony because they were completely unaware that Kenia had a fake ID, that she drank alcohol like that. But they also understood, hey, she's a teenager. She's experiencing independence. She's just graduated high school. She's just moved out. Like, I feel like this is kind of tracking for people in that stage of life. But what they found the most alarming was that they knew Kenia would never go anywhere without her belongings, especially her phone. And her car was apparently still just sitting somewhere. She had no wallet. She had no money. None of this was looking good. Kenia's family continued to call friends to see if anyone had heard from her or seen her anywhere. And they also decided later on in the day to go through Kenia's phone that that her friends had dropped off. And they were hoping that it might provide them some insight, maybe a clue indicating where she was. Maybe she had even called her own phone hoping one of them would answer and then come and get her. It didn't seem that she was very active on her phone starting at around 7 p.m. the day before, so she wasn't really using it. She had received a lot of different text messages, but it doesn't seem any of them really gave her family any information until they got to one that had come into her phone from 7 p.m. that day, April 1st. And it was from a number that was not saved as a contact. And the text read, quote, "Hey, this is Travis, the guy who gave you a ride last night. White creepy van, smiley face. Did you get home okay?" Immediately, her family saw this text and they were like, this deviates from the pattern. This right here is strange, and this Travis guy possibly has answers. He apparently gave her a ride somewhere the night before, and so they wondered if maybe he was actually the last person to see her. He could provide them with all sorts of information. How was she? Was she by herself? Where did you take her? And so they started to call him, hoping that it would help them find Kenia. But call after call to Travis's phone number went unanswered. So at this point, Tony said, forget this, I'm moving to the next step. And so he reached out to Denver police to report Kenia as missing. But unfortunately, here we are with another situation where Denver PD told Tony and Maria that they had to wait 72 hours. They gave Tony and Maria the same spiel so many different departments give worried parents, that Kenia's an adult, she's 19, she can make her own decisions, she's probably just out having a good time. So despite all of the red flags, like leaving her personal belongings at a club, the fact she had been at this club drinking underage, this strange text from a stranger that picked her up in a white free candy van, and the fact that this was entirely against her character, authorities wouldn't do anything. And I want to say real quick that this is such a huge misconception. Contrary to what is portrayed in true crime media, and for some reason across several departments, there is no mandated waiting period to report someone as missing. That's not a thing. And it seriously undermines the most critical time frame in these cases. I have no idea why this became a thing that was said. Maybe because most missing persons cases are resolved fairly quickly and it's not an actual missing person. So I understand the frustration of the police department trying to determine what's what. But if you are ever in this position and you so seriously believe something is wrong and are reporting a loved one is missing, do not fall for the 72-hour thing. It's not real. Push until you finally get something done. But at this point, her family is hearing this from the police department. They trusted the police and they're like, all right, we hear you. But they knew they had to do what they could in the meantime. So at this point, Tony starts to blow up Travis's phone. He called Travis at least 25 times over the next 24 hours, leaving message after message explaining, hey, you're one of the last people that may have seen my daughter. You might have information that could bring her home. Please call me back. But still, Travis was never answering the phone and never calling them back. So they continued on. They printed missing persons flyers. They started to post them around town. And then finally, in the late evening hours of April 2nd, Travis finally called back, and we're now like 2 days into Kenia's disappearance. And he explained to Tony everything that had happened in the early morning hours of April 1st. 31-year-old Travis Forbes told Tony that he had been dropping off his friend Eddie in downtown Denver around 2:30 a.m. on the 1st, when they both noticed a girl that was visibly upset and very intoxicated. This girl was Kenia. Neither of them had ever met her before, had no idea who she was, but they both felt like she seriously needed help. It was obvious that she was by herself and in distress. And so they approached her, and she, in fact, was distraught. She was talking about what sounded like a breakup. She said that she didn't have anything on her, no phone or keys. She didn't know where her friends were, so she was basically lost, and they offered to help her. Kenia told them that her car was parked by a club about a mile down the road, so they all headed that way to look for it. And when they couldn't find it, Travis finally was like, you know what? I think the best option here is to just give you a ride home. And so Kenia agreed and provided her address to him, which was about a 20-minute drive away. And Travis said he was very familiar with the area, that he worked nearby, and so taking her home was no issue, and it was the safest for everyone. And so Kenia and Travis dropped Eddie off first, and then it was just the two of them for the rest of the journey. Travis said that Kenia remained upset throughout the ride and kept saying things like, how could he do this to me? I can't believe this. He broke my heart. And so he was just trying to provide her comfort. I think he even said that at one point he was trying to teach her breathing exercises to get her to calm down. And eventually she asked him to stop at a nearby Conoco gas station to buy her some cigarettes. Travis said that the two of them pulled into the Conoco gas station at 505 Spear Boulevard, but it was pretty clear by the moment they pulled in that this gas station was no longer open. But before Travis could say anything, Kenia jumped out of the car, and he realized that she was approaching a man that was walking toward them both, smoking a cigarette. And so he claimed Kenia approached this stranger, asked to bum a cigarette from him, and according to Travis, Kenia then asked the man to sit with her on the curb while they smoked. And so he said they were sitting there speaking Spanish to each other and, having conversations. She seemed fine. She was opening up to him, and I guess he was just standing there third wheeling it. And then without warning, Kenia and the strange man just got up and walked off together. Travis claimed that he called out to Kenia to ask if she was okay. I guess this took him by surprise, but he said that she just ignored him, so he left. He was like, you know what? She can take care of herself. She'll be fine. And so he got in the car, watched as Kenia walked off with this stranger, even though he was technically a stranger himself, and he went to his girlfriend's house for the night. And I guess at some point he got Kenia's phone number because he texted her later that day, the text that her dad saw, to make sure that she made it home okay, which she hadn't. Travis seemed to feel really awful that he had been the last to see her, that he let her walk away with this guy, and now she hadn't come home. But it's unclear why it took him 24 hours and 25 frantic phone calls from Kenia's family to finally reach back out to them and tell them this story. And while what Travis was saying kind of seemed like it could be possible, there was so much about this story that Tony was just not buying. There was this gut feeling that something was wrong, and there were details that just didn't seem to be adding up to him. According to Travis's story, this means that Kenia got into a shady white van with two strange men that she didn't know. And that in and of itself just did not sound like her at all. He also started to wonder about different smaller details about Travis's story. For instance, he claimed that they tried to go and find her car, but he couldn't understand why they would go to do that when she had also immediately told them that she didn't have her keys. He also didn't believe that Kenia would demand for him to go get cigarettes to stop at this gas station, knowing that she didn't have her money or a wallet. Like, she didn't expect things from people like that. And so the idea that she wandered off with these two strangers and demanded all of these things already felt strange enough, but the idea that she then wandered off with yet another strange man after being with this guy for 5 minutes just felt totally implausible. This entire story sounded so off. And so when he started to think about how her friends described her as being incredibly intoxicated, and then you have what Travis is saying, he started to wonder if all of this behavior could be explained by Kenia potentially being drugged, which left her that much more vulnerable to all these strange men she just apparently kept walking off with. So he called the police again, hoping that this new information, this conversation he had with Travis, would prompt them to file a report. But still, they refused, which is so disappointing, but honestly, in the same hand, not surprising. Now, at this point, Travis offered to meet Tony at the Conoco gas station so they could talk face to face. Tony's realizing that nothing's going to get done unless he himself does it, and he has all these questions. He wants to see where Travis is talking about. He wants to talk to Travis and get the vibe from him, see where she allegedly walked off with the man, pretty much anything that might be helpful. But he also had this feeling in the back of his gut that something's wrong with Travis. Travis is sketchy, he doesn't know this guy or his intentions, just that he was one of the last to be with his missing daughter. So he agreed to go to the gas station, but he grabbed his 9mm first and headed out into the night. Maria decided to stay home. She was just too overwhelmed with the different possibilities. She was terrified of Travis and what his intentions might be. She had tried to convince Tony to stay home, but he refused. So worried for his safety, she called the police and she told them, hey, Tony's going to meet this Travis guy. Y'all aren't going to do anything. He's saying he's going to go find out for himself, and he armed himself. And she's like, someone's got to be there, keep the peace. There needs to be someone making sure this is a safe situation for everyone. And so by the time Tony arrived at the gas station, the Denver Police Department was already there waiting with Travis. Tony approached Travis feeling uncertain, but he kind of had this sense of relief go over him because when he saw Travis face to face, it wasn't really what I guess he was expecting. Travis was just this average build white guy with blonde hair, blue eyes. He didn't seem threatening. He had, a big smile. And so he's like, okay, maybe this is a nice guy. Maybe, he's harmless. But when Tony went to shake Travis's hand, he noticed that Travis was trembling. He said it felt like there was an earthquake. And in that moment, he knew something is in fact so wrong here. Travis told Tony and the police the same exact story about that night as he had to Tony on the phone. And aside from the strange trembling handshake, he appeared calm and collected, but still something felt off. And every time Tony looked up at that big white van, he just got this uneasy feeling. The police ended up asking to speak to Travis alone, and so Tony took advantage of this and wandered over to Travis's van to check it out himself. And immediately, all he could smell was bleach. Once Travis and the officer were done talking, Tony kind of discreetly told the officer, hey, go and smell the back of his van. And so the officer walked over and smelled the exact same thing. So Travis was questioned about what the van was for, what was going on, and he explained that he worked at a bakery. He said he made gluten-free granola bars and he needed the van for delivering his product around town. So again, another believable claim. Travis remained cooperative. He gave officers the consent to look into the van, and they did. The front was filled with trash and food wrappers, clothes, there were tools strewn about. But when they opened the back was pristine. And again, the smell of bleach was even more overwhelming, and they even saw that it appeared brand new carpeting had just been rolled out into the back of the van. I mean, it was still holding its weird shape and smelling of plastic. But at this point, despite all of these odd things, they really had nothing to warrant a further investigation. Travis had been forthcoming. I mean, he had offered to meet Tony face to face in person. He was cooperative with the officer. His story was consistent. And if you really tried to break things down to the bare bones, maybe the back smelled like bleach and was clean because that's the area he kept the food, and that was what was required of him. I mean, really, this could all be explained. So they took note of everything they saw, and they told Travis to come in for a formal interview as a witness. And finally, Kenia was filed as a missing person. But the officer and Tony couldn't shake something unsettling about that night. In particular, there was something odd that Travis had done. Travis had been expressing to Tony his hope that Kenia would be found, and then he unexpectedly burst into tears, became highly emotional, and this just seemed like an out-of-place reaction for someone who had only known Kenia for less than an hour. With all of the information they had so far, they decided to run a parallel investigation. Authorities seemed to have a gut feeling that this was going to turn into a potential homicide, and so they didn't even hesitate to bring homicide in. And her family at this point had no idea. They still just figured this was a missing persons investigation, and I think authorities didn't want to scare them right off the bat by telling them. So an investigation began. Authorities dug deep into the events of March 31st. Kenia was confirmed to have been at the 24K club on the night of March 31st, and she was in fact highly intoxicated and dancing with a man. And according to the club staff, she was so intoxicated that they decided to kick her out of the club. And both she and this man that she had been dancing with left together. So now this introduced another person who may have been with Kenia and might have crucial information. And and so they needed to track him down. In the meantime, investigators continued to speak with everyone who had any contact with Kenia between March 31st and April 1st. Unfortunately, they didn't obtain a lot of information. As I'd already said, she had really stopped using her phone that night, and after she left the club, she had no way of communicating with anyone. So they really were relying on what these last people that saw her claimed. Her photo circulated in the news across the United States and even in Honduras, hoping that public tips might help lead them to her or to the man that she had been dancing with, or even to the stranger that Travis claimed she left the gas station with. And while they were keeping all of these different lines open, they continued to keep their focus on Travis. And part of that involved pulling up his criminal history, just out of curiosity and so they could be prepared when he came in for his formal interview. And it revealed that the seemingly innocent, harmless looking man from the gas station was anything but. Travis had a very long criminal history dating back to when he was just 17 years old. He had been arrested for robbing over 16 homes and businesses in the Fort Collins, Colorado area. And that's a lot of places to rob, but not just that. During the investigation, police searched his bedroom to try and locate some of the stolen items, and instead they found something they weren't really expecting: several pairs of women's underwear, and they had been vandalized. He had ripped some of them for reasons I don't want to know, and others had been marked with the letter M in like a black permanent marker. Again, who knows why? What does the M stand for? And despite being just 17, he ended up facing felony charges for these robberies and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. However, instead of serving time, he was sent to a military camp. But that military camp lasted a whopping 2 months until he was kicked out. And so ultimately, this 9 years of prison turned into just probation. That is all he ended up getting. Probation for these 16 burglaries of homes and businesses. Now, Travis accumulated several other charges over time. That was far from the last time he did something, and it included all kinds of crimes: in harassment, assault, possession of a weapon by a felon. He was also accused of harassment involving physical force because he threw rocks at a woman who was jogging. He committed more burglaries and thefts. He broke curfew for his probation 43 times. It seemed like instead of learning from his mistakes or attempting to reform, he just continued to escalate his criminal behavior. And this was concerning because at the time of Kenia's disappearance, Travis was on probation for domestic violence charges. A man known for being violent towards women was last seen with a now missing woman. Again, it's not painting a really good picture. Despite this troubled background, though, everything that Travis reported checked out. Investigators contacted the owner of the bakery that he claimed to work at. She confirmed his employment. She said his gluten-free granola bars were great. He used the van for deliveries. And according to her, his business was just thriving. And so they're like, okay, maybe he finally turned his life around and is on a more positive path, and we can't focus on his past while looking at this present problem. And on April 5th, Travis arrived at the police station for his interview. He reiterated the same information he had previously shared with Tony and the other officers at the gas station. I believe he had actually provided a written statement at the gas station so they could confirm through that as well. But this time he provided many more details about the man that Kenia had allegedly walked off with at the Conoco. Travis told the investigators that this man's name was Dan. So now they have a first name, but Travis said he had no clue what this guy's last name was. But he was also able to provide a very detailed physical description. Travis described Dan as being of potentially Asian descent. He was approximately between 5'4" and 5'8", but he said he was no taller than Kenia was. He said that this man had a round face, short black hair, a slim build, and was wearing dark blue jeans. And Travis mentioned that for some reason, Kenia just seemed to instantly connect with Dan, pouring her heart out to him and the trouble in her life and how her heart had been broken. So again, following the same story that he's been saying from the get-go. And so now authorities are like, thank goodness we have have a way to try to track this Dan guy down, because at this point they hadn't had a name, a description, anything. But then there was another thing that happened that just made authorities question Travis. He had given this detailed description of Dan, but when they asked him for a description of Kenia, he was not able to provide them with any details. He had spent about an hour with her as compared to the 5 minutes or so that he spent with Dan. And he said that he couldn't even say what she looked like because he, quote, couldn't really see her face. I mean, if she's freaking out, if you're teaching her breathing exercises, you're having all these conversations, she's giving you her phone number, her address, how did you not see her face? You can't even say what she's wearing. It just felt really, really off. And so as Travis was confirming his account of events that night, the police decided to go ahead and follow up on everything he said to ensure accuracy, and they were doing that during the interview. And so authorities managed to locate this Eddie guy, this friend that Travis claimed to have been present the night they met Kenia. And Eddie confirmed the entire story up until they were dropped off. He said, yep, we found her. She was upset. He was going to take her home. I got dropped off. That's it. And so at this point, they wanted to confirm Travis's alibi. And as I had already said, he claimed to everyone that he had gone to be with his girlfriend that night after Kenia walked off, that he got in his car, drove to his girlfriend's, and that was that. And so they managed to locate Carrie Humphrey, who had been dating Travis at the time. Now, Carrie told the police that she was actually supposed to go out with Travis and friends on Thursday, March 31st. So she was supposed to be there, but she canceled last minute to focus on schoolwork, and Travis went out anyways. She said that he ended up coming back to her house at around 3:30 a.m., which was consistent with the time that he had mentioned to authorities, and that he left around 8 to 8:30 a.m. before she even woke up. She said that she hadn't noticed anything unusual when he returned home. I guess he mumbled something about, having a good time that night, but then he quickly fell asleep. So there really wasn't anything that rang off any alarm bells for her. She said that they texted all throughout the day on April 1st. They spoke on the phone at around 9 p.m. and everything seemed normal. But she said that the following day, April 2nd, was when she finally found out about Kenia. She said that Travis had called her freaking out sometime after 4 p.m. that day and said that he needed to meet her in person. And so when he got face to face with his girlfriend, Carrie Humphrey, he said he had given a girl a ride in the early morning hours of the 1st, and now she was missing and her family was relentlessly calling him, and he had no clue what to do about it. So Carrie said that they decided to meet up with Eddie, the guy that had been there, to kind of talk about what to do. And I think they met in like a park or something, and they were there for a few hours talking about Kenia's disappearance and, how the events played out that night and the best way to go from there. And I guess Eddie had really pushed Travis to call Kenia's parents back to tell them what he knew. So all three of them were there when Travis made that phone call. Carrie told the police that she had no reason at all to doubt what Travis was telling her. She believed that he was honest and she trusted him. She even mentioned that he seemed so genuinely upset about not doing more to help Kenia. He expressed his remorse for not stopping her from leaving with this total stranger, and he was putting a lot of blame on himself. And while there were still some odd details that raised questions, most of the story was aligning. And with him now having a confirmed, corroborated alibi from 3:30 to 8:30 in the morning, authorities really didn't have much else to push with. So they thanked Travis, but also still scheduled him for a polygraph test just so they could know for sure they had done everything they could. And so in the meantime, they continued to investigate all the other leads. They spoke to Kenia's boyfriend to confirm that he wasn't involved, and he too was able to provide a solid alibi, so they ruled him out as a suspect. And so this now left them with Travis that they still didn't quite want to let go yet, this man Kenia left the bar with, and this other stranger at the gas station named Dan. So authorities decided to check the location where Eddie and Travis claimed to have picked Kenia up to see if maybe the CCTV footage offered any insights, if it helped them identify the man she left the bar with. This led authorities to an apartment complex called The Lofts, and sure enough, there was footage from that night showing Kenia entering the building with a man that they believed was the guy she was seen in the club with. Now, Kenia and this man take the elevator up, they get off on the same floor together, they go into the same apartment together, together. But less than 5 minutes later, Kenia comes out of the apartment, goes down to the lobby, and stands there by herself for quite some time before ultimately walking off, which presumably was the time that she ended up meeting Travis. And so authorities are able to identify this man as the man from the club who's named Chad. And so they locate this Chad guy, they speak to him. He's also very forthcoming. He said that they had been dancing together that night, they left together, which is all matching up with what authorities already knew. And Chad explained that Kenia left his apartment in such a hurry because she realized, like the moment she walked in, that she had left all of her belongings behind at the club, her phone, her wallet, her purse, her keys. And so she wanted to go back and get it, or I guess was upset about it. And so he decided to walk her down to the lobby and left her there, returning to his apartment. And all I could think the entire time I was learning that information was, how does that even help her? Like, why didn't this guy offer to call her friends? Why did he just leave her there in the lobby of his building, alone, drunk, without a phone, without a way to contact someone for help? I mean, what exactly was the plan here? Now, regardless of whether that was a good choice or not, the CCTV ended up showing that Chad didn't come back out of his apartment. He stayed in all night long. Kenia eventually left, and so he was ruled out as a suspect. Now they were left with only Travis and this Dan person. And so they're desperately trying to find Dan. They've already spoken to Travis. They've done what they can. They're waiting for his polygraph test. So they've got to be able to rule this Dan guy out, but they couldn't find him anywhere. And so authorities at this point start to wonder if Dan even exists, if he's even a real person. And at that moment, the world was about to come crashing down on Travis in a big way. Police had already spoken to Monica Poole, who was the owner of the bakery where Travis worked. We've already spoken about that. However, she ended up calling them back after noticing something strange. I guess she started to realize that money had been missing from the bakery, and so she wanted to try to figure out who was behind it. And so she went to check the surveillance footage from the weekend of April 1st and on. And that's when she noticed that all of the surveillance stuff had been unplugged. And so she plugged everything back in and started to look through the last things that had been recorded. Travis Forbes was seen walking into the bakery the morning or early afternoon of April 1st. And he was wearing long yellow rubber gloves, okay? And he's seen walking into the office. He walks up to the camera. You can see him reach up like he's going to unplug it, and the feed goes black. And so she's like, okay, this is really weird. So at this point, she decided to rewind even further in that day to figure out what Travis was doing. You know, why did he show up in the office with yellow rubber gloves on and disable the cameras? And she sees something even more disturbing. Travis can be seen in the surveillance footage entering the back of the bakery, pulling a cart behind him. And mind you, there's other people in the bakery. Like, everyone else is going about their business, and he's acting as if this is just another casual day. And on this cart that Travis is pulling is this very large white cooler, and it's tightly sealed with duct tape. And so he takes this large white cooler and he puts it into the walk-in freezer, which she's thinking is strange because he makes gluten-free granola bars that are, shelf stable. There's no reason for him to need to put this gigantic duct tape cooler into the freezer. And so then shortly after this, something else alarming. Travis goes back out to his van and he proceeds to come back in with a rolled up carpet that he pulled from the back of his van. He then carries bottles of bleach back to his van before coming inside and disabling the cameras in the business. What the hell? Okay. What the hell? Authorities at this point quickly rushed to the bakery to gather evidence, and they began speaking with nearby businesses to see if anyone had witnessed anything unusual apart from the strange thing that CCTV had captured on April 1st. And sure enough, they found more alarming information. One employee ended up telling authorities that on April 1st, later on in the day, he saw Travis using a burn barrel behind the bakery, which obviously seems odd. Again, what do you need a burn barrel for? And then another man mentioned that on April 2nd, he saw Travis cleaning out that same cooler from the CCTV behind the bakery. So now there is just more sketchy information attaching itself to Travis. It seemed at this point that word had already reached Monica before this information was reported to authorities, and so she had actually gone to question Travis about his strange behavior. And she said the first thing she noticed when she went to speak to him was that he had fresh scratches on his arm. And so when she asked him about it, he claimed he had been attacked by a homeless man, which again, could potentially be true. And Travis also had explanations for both the burn barrel and the disabled cameras. He claimed that he had the burn barrel behind the bakery to burn some moldy weed that he had, which, I mean, okay, I guess. And then he said that he had to turn off the cameras for privacy that day because he had to change his clothes. I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't use a bathroom or whatever, but again, you have kind of like these seemingly half-truths, maybe plausible explanations given every single time Travis opens his mouth. And so Monica brought all this information forward to authorities and also told the police that she reviewed the schedule and found that Travis wasn't even supposed to be working at the bakery on April 1st, so she didn't even know why he was there. So after hearing all of this information, the police are like, we knew something weird was going on with this guy, and now they feel even more so. And so they're waiting for Travis to come in for his polygraph. They want to be able to question him about this. They're ready to catch him in some sort of lie. But lo and behold, guess who fails to show? The time came and went for Travis to have his polygraph, and he was nowhere to be found. Conveniently, he had just vanished into thin air. He wasn't coming to the bakery. His friends hadn't seen him or heard from him. He wasn't answering his phone. And so police started to actively search for him. They were trying to locate him, but every time they got close, he would just vanish. It was like chasing smoke. And so at this point, they decided to obtain a warrant for his cell phone records because they wanted to try to figure out more information, catch him in a lie some other way. And again, the findings were enlightening. They went into this wanting to confirm Travis's whereabouts from the night of March 31st into April 1st. And as we already know, and as was corroborated by two other people, he claimed he found Kenia at around 2:30 a.m. and by 3:30 a.m. he was at his girlfriend's house. And so because this had already been corroborated and confirmed, they expected this to be reflected in his records, except it wasn't at all. His phone was nowhere near his girlfriend's house at all between 3:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., contradicting both of their statements. So that rock-solid alibi that they had accepted because there seemed to be agreement and proof of it was a load of BS. He had actually been near the bakery for quite some time that day before suddenly driving 45 minutes north to the small town of Keensburg. And not just that, but he went to Keensburg and ended up in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so authorities are thinking, this is it. We finally got him. So bloodhounds and searchers were sent to Keensburg because authorities believed at this point, Travis might have killed Kenia and disposed of her body, that this whole story he'd been feeding everyone for forever now was a load of absolute crap. Why else would he be trying to run away from them? Why else would he stop cooperating? Why else would he lie about his alibi? But they knew that at this point, they just had their suspicions and no solid evidence, so they needed to find her body if that was the case. And if there was ever a place it might be, this field was it. But despite searching every location where Travis had stopped in those fields in Keensburg, nothing was found. And so they were so frustrated because it seemed like all of the efforts they were putting into looking deeply and in between the lines in Travis's behavior and the evidence they were gathering, it just wasn't panning out and they could not find him. And then suddenly they ended up finding Travis somewhere they never expected him to be. He was on the news being interviewed about Kenia's disappearance, and the entire interview is so strange. And I'm incredibly frustrated because I cannot find it anywhere. It seems to have been taken down. I wanted to share clips with you guys. Sometimes I can manage to find it while I'm editing, but I doubt that's going to be the case this time. However, if you end up watching the documentary I have listed down below, parts of it are there. On Crime Junkie, the podcast, you can hear it. And then that chapter also seems to have gotten some clips from it. But in the interview, Travis appears to be feeling sorry for himself. Like, this is not an interview about where Kenya might be and how he hopes she's found. Like, the entire thing is about him. He was crying the whole time, saying that Kenya was the one who chose to walk off with another guy and that he wasn't in control of her choices. He was insisting that he shouldn't have to feel guilty about it, that it wasn't his fault what she did. He repeatedly referred to her as, quote, that girl or that missing girl, expressing that the entire situation had been so emotional for him. It was like he was trying to make himself feel better. And he even tried to make it seem like he didn't remember what her name was. All he wanted to focus on was how things had been so emotional for him, how this had ruined his life. Meanwhile, Kenya is still missing. Now, how any of that is harder for him than it is for her family is absolutely beyond me. But probably the one thing that stood out the most in this interview was that they asked him if he had anything to do with her disappearance. And he said no, but he shook his head yes.
Since you're a person of interest, let me ask you this. Did you do something with her?
No.
Did you kidnap her?
No.
Did you sexually assault her?
I did not.
Did you murder her?
I did not. No.
And for those of you interested in body language, that tells you all you need to know. And I try to be as centered as I can while going through these cases. I try to look at all different perspectives. And I can understand that if you haven't done anything wrong and authorities are zeroing in on you, it is probably so scary and uncomfortable. But if you've truly not done anything, they're likely not going to keep on focusing on you. If you protect yourself, if you get an attorney, if you follow all the right steps, you should be fine. And from everything that I've seen, the Denver Police Department was incredibly patient with him. They never forced him to speak with anyone. They allowed everything to be voluntary on his schedule. So his reaction, and this being the way he's talking about it, like, she ruined my life and I'm so scared and blah, 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 it seemed more indicative of his own inner turmoil and secrets rather than anything else or any way that the police department made him feel, which is very telling. But after this interview, Travis disappeared once again. And so authorities decided to go back to the drawing board and investigate all of his friends to see if anyone would finally talk, and thank goodness they struck gold. So just before Travis went off the map, police had actually gotten a warrant to take his van in for forensic testing. Once they heard about this burn barrel and, all the odd behavior at the bakery from Travis. And so they had his van. He had no car. And according to a friend of his, or I think it may have even been an ex-girlfriend, she agreed to lend him her 4Runner temporarily. And he never brought it back and was avoiding her altogether. And so now I guess she was mad enough to start talking to police. And she told them that she had considered filing the car as stolen. And so they're like, oh, perfect. What do you know? We can get that done for you in a jiffy, knowing that it would help them out if they essentially had a bolo out for him. Putting this car as stolen meant that if it ever got ran anywhere, they would be alerted and they would have a way to track him. And so sure enough, on May 5th, Denver Police Department got a call about a stolen vehicle, the same 4Runner that was last connected to Travis. And it was from officers in, wait for it, Austin, Texas. So let's add running to a different state on our list of strange shit that Travis Forbes does. So an officer doing rounds decided to go through a hotel parking lot. And this officer said that for some reason, like not anything normal he would regularly do, he saw this car parked in this hotel parking lot with out-of-state tags, and he just felt the urge to run the tags. And sure enough, when he did, they came back as stolen. When officers reviewed the details of this stolen vehicle report, they immediately contacted Denver Police Department, who were like, hell yeah, arrest this man as soon as humanly possible. And so Travis was arrested in Austin, Texas on charges of stolen property. But he seemed completely unaware at this point that they had connected him back to Denver and the investigation into Kenya's disappearance. I think to him, this was just another one of his charges that he got. Until the detective from Denver walked into the interview room in Texas. Legitimately, it looked like Travis's soul was about to leave his body. He goes so pale, his face falls so flat. You could tell the only thing ringing through his head was, oh shit. And so he starts to kind of unravel a bit. He admitted to avoiding the police and acknowledged that he had messed up by doing the news interview, but he was still clinging to this self-pity kind of thing, claiming that this had been the worst experience of his life. He kept blaming once again that girl for ruining his life, but he still maintained that he knew nothing. He made it seem like he was just doing all of this because he was so stressed, he was so scared, he didn't want to get in trouble for something he didn't do, and he was not dropping that act. But then detectives decided to drop something for themselves. While they had been chasing him for weeks, forensics teams had been tirelessly working on examining everything they could. Items from the bakery, his van, the cooler, the burn barrel, and they found one of Kenia's hairs in the back of Travis's van. And this stuck out to them because it contradicted all of Travis's previous statements. He had always said that she stayed in the front seat of the van, that she never went into the back, probably because he knew it would be weird if he said she did, first of all, not only because why would she be in the back of your van, but also because the entire back of the van smelled like bleach. So the detective made him confirm again where she sat in the car, and Travis again said that she only was in the front, and then they revealed what they had discovered. This hair in the back of his van. And he did seem shocked for a moment, but then he very quickly gathered himself and said that her hair could have easily fallen out and been blown back there, which again, just like the rest of the things he says, could be a possibility. He's like, there's a barrier there, but there are holes, you never know. But then the detective mentioned that the hair contained the root, indicating that it had not fallen out and blown back there. It had been pulled out. And it was at this point that Travis asked for an attorney. At this point, authorities felt like they were finally starting to corner Travis, that they were slowly gathering enough evidence against him, that they had found something more solid that scared the crap out of him enough to make him stop talking and get an attorney. And so they made plans to extradite him back to Colorado. But those things take time. So that didn't happen for almost 2 months. And during that entire 2 months, Kenia's family anxiously waited, hoping for answers. They were holding candlelight vigils, they made public pleas, organized fundraisers, and Crime Stoppers offered a $2,000 reward. Authorities continued investigating as well. They conducted, I believe, a total of 15 searches in Keensburg. They were checking and rechecking locations. They were using new methods, but their searches were still fruitless. However, they were still convinced that Travis was their guy. They believed Kenia likely wasn't alive any longer. They just had to prove it. And this reality was devastating for Kenia's family to consider, because Kenia's mom had worked so hard to bring her to the United States, worked so hard for her future and her opportunities. And to think that at only 19 years old, someone would steal that away from her and all of them was unimaginable. And despite this now very real possibility that Kenia was no longer alive, her family held on to hope that maybe Kenia was being kept somewhere, that she was being held hostage, and the worst hadn't, in fact, happened. They were hopeful that there would come a day when they would see her again. And then finally, Travis was extradited. But as soon as he set foot on Denver soil, the girl who had owned the stolen car decided to drop the charges because he was her friend. Look me in my eyes, okay? Stop protecting horrible people. Like I said at the beginning of this video, it feels like at every turn in this case, some missed opportunity, some bad decision was made that allowed this to continue. And this, in my opinion, was probably one of the more infuriating ones, because had Travis not been released, had this woman decided to keep the charges against him, he wouldn't have gone on to do what he did just weeks later. And so on June 30th, no one could do a thing when Travis was released. So now let's fast forward just a few days to July 4th. The Fort Collins Police Department had received a call from a concerned citizen about a man that was behaving erratically. And when they arrived, they found a man kind of muttering to himself. He appeared paranoid, on edge. They actually described him as looking like a hunted animal. However, once the police assured this man that he wasn't in trouble, they were just checking to make sure he was okay, it was as if a switch flipped. He suddenly started acting completely normal, And the police are like, all right, we just wanted to make sure you were fine and let him go about his night. So I'm sure you're thinking totally normal circumstance, probably happens on a regular basis. But just moments later, Fort Collins Police Department was approached by Denver Police Department. It turned out that they hadn't just let Travis go that easily. They had been surveilling him since the moment he stepped out of jail. And this erratically behaving man was Travis Forbes. So they briefed Fort Collins on the situation, what they suspected Travis of at this point. Denver Police Department had hoped initially that when he was released from jail that he would go back to wherever he potentially buried Kenia. But when he didn't do that, they just kept watching him and all he was doing was getting drunk at bars. And so at this point, now that Fort Collins was kind of aware of the situation and they could monitor him themselves, they decided to stop the surveillance. And I so wish they hadn't. I so wish they hadn't. It's just another one of those moments that makes me want to cry, scream, and rip my hair out. Just days later, on July 8th, Fort Collins reached out to Denver Police Department to share a devastating story and a possible connection to Kenia's case and Travis Forbes. Apparently, hours after that July 4th encounter with Travis, where Fort Collins Police and Denver Police were talking about how he was potentially involved in the murder of a young woman, a woman named Lydia Tillman ended up being attacked. She had just moved to the area. She was living in her apartment alone for less than a month. And I guess that day she had enjoyed some of the 4th of July festivities before calling it a night. And as she was walking into her apartment, a man shoved her from behind and followed her inside. He proceeded to beat her repeatedly, stomped on her head, and despite her attempts to fight back, she was eventually knocked unconscious. She regained consciousness only to find that her apartment was now engulfed in flames. And so in a desperate bid to save herself, you guys, she jumped from a second-story window. At 5:30 a.m. on July 5th, Fort Collins police received a call about this fire, and they found Lydia clinging to life. No one could believe she was alive. Like, they genuinely looked at her and saw the extent of her injuries and the fact that her home was on fire, and they thought there was no way she was going to make it out of this. And so quickly they put her in an ambulance and rushed her to the hospital. And when she was at the hospital, like right upon arrival, she had a stroke from what she had been through, and it was found that she had been so horribly beaten by someone that she had a broken jaw, like it was completely shattered. Her eye sockets were shattered. She had been sexually assaulted. And not just that, but someone had doused her in bleach along with the rest of her apartment before setting it all on fire. The details of what happened to Lydia were so horrific and unbelievable, and ultimately she was placed on life support in hopes that her body would heal, and Fort Collins jumped into trying to solve what happened to her and who did it because they never wanted this to happen to anyone else. But unfortunately, when they went to her apartment, obviously the use of bleach hindered a lot of their investigation. There was not a lot of evidence left behind, but Fort Collins also remembered this situation with Travis Forbes. They remembered what they were told about Kenia, the bleach, the fire, and so they believed it was possible Travis was involved. And unlike in Kenia's case, Fort Collins had DNA. Lydia had fought for her life, and in the process, she managed to get her attacker's DNA under her fingernails. And thankfully, when Travis had been in Texas, Denver Police Department managed to get a warrant to obtain his DNA, something that he could not say no to. And so they had the swab. They had something to compare Fort Collins' DNA to. Over the next few days, while waiting for the results, the Fort Collins Police Department kept a closer eye on Travis, and they actually had multiple encounters with him. On the 10th, he was approached by officers after he had been harassing a heavily intoxicated woman outside of a club that clearly had no interest in his advances. And then again, shortly after the first woman, authorities saw him harassing yet another intoxicated woman. And at this point, they realized they had to take action because while they lacked DNA confirmation connecting him to Lydia's attack, connecting him to Kenia, his behavior was following a very troubling pattern. The officers felt like if they let him go, he was going to just find another target. I mean, they had already seen him acting strangely on the 4th of July, and he potentially only hours later went on to attack someone. And they'd already approached him that night about behaving strangely to one woman, and he immediately went and did it to another one. And so they started to question him, and he basically gave them reason for arrest. He told them a false name and a false address. And so they arrested him for providing false information to a police officer, hoping at bare minimum they kept him off the streets that night and prevented him from potentially attacking someone else. And the following day, just as they were about to have no choice but to release him, the DNA results came back. Travis Forbes was identified as a positive match to Lydia's attacker. He was subsequently arrested on 12 charges, including arson and attempted murder. Denver detectives showed up once again, and this time you can tell that Travis knew his time was up. He initially tried to push back, saying that his attorneys had advised him that telling the truth would gain him nothing. However, he soon began to panic and attempted to negotiate. He started to express his fear of going to prison with the label of a sex offender. He knew that that meant bad things for him once he was locked up. He also said that he wanted to avoid the death penalty, and eventually he said he wanted to confess. I think he actually said, "I want to confess so bad." And so a joint deal was made involving the Fort Collins and Denver authorities, along with all attorneys, prosecutors, the whole 9 yards. Travis would plead guilty to charges related to Lydia's attack and to the murder of Kenia. He also agreed to confess everything that had happened and lead them to Kenia's body. And in exchange, the death penalty would be removed from the table, because authorities had basically told him, look, we are chipping away at this. We will figure this out. They were pretty confident that if he didn't agree, they would gather the evidence eventually needed to charge him with Kenia's presumed murder, which would likely lead to the prosecution seeking the death penalty. And at that point, there would be no way to squirrel himself out of it. So Travis ultimately agreed to this. He did not want to face the death penalty. And so he began recounting the true events of the early morning hours of April 1st. Travis stated that most of what he had told the police was true, that he was with his friend Eddie, that they did see Kenia upset, and she had been speaking about a breakup. He said that they had gone to look for her car, they had stopped to get her cigarettes, but this is where the story takes a very different turn. Because just like authorities suspected, there was never a man named Dan. That was all a part of his story. Instead, Travis said that Kenia ended up passing out in his van, and he took advantage of the moment. As he was in the process of attempting to sexually assault her, Kenia woke up and started to fight him off. She was scared and she was hitting him and screaming, so he said that he started to hit her back, and eventually, when she couldn't calm down, he strangled her. He frantically started to think of what to do next now that he had this dead 19-year-old girl in his van, and he remembered that he kept a cooler in the back that he used to deliver his granola bars. So he placed her inside of it and apparently drove around for hours with her in the cooler trying to figure out what to do next. Travis said by the early morning hours, he decided the only option he had was to go to the bakery and put her in the freezer, I guess to preserve her and avoid detection while starting to clean up the evidence. And you have to remember that there were people at the bakery going in and out. And so the nerve that he had, like the confidence he must have had to do that, makes him that much more terrifying. He decided to take all of her clothes off, and then that night on April 1st, he used the burn barrel to burn everything that Kenia had touched, including the carpet that was in the back of his van. He then bleached absolutely everything. So all of those gut feelings, all of those things that Tony and authorities initially noticed, all of it came back to something Travis had done to cover up a horrid crime. By September 7th, Travis was in the back of a cruiser, directing investigators to Kenia's body. They traveled to Keensburg, of all places, the same place that authorities had tracked his movements and searched earlier. And while they hadn't found anything in the places they looked at, Travis insisted that's where she was. He had them pull over by a grove of trees not far from I-76, claiming that this was where Kenia was buried. The investigator walked over to the trees and said, I don't see anything. Where is she? Travis directed him to take a few steps to the side and then said, "You're standing right on top of her." A slow and methodical dig began, and they eventually uncovered the remains of Kenia in a 4-foot hole. She was curled in a fetal position, covered with a tarp, and next to her body was a credit card with Travis's name on it. And when authorities asked him, why did you put this card that identifies you with her body, he explained to authorities that it's not that he wanted to get caught, but he figured if they were good enough at their job to find her body, that he deserved to get caught. Travis at this point was charged with first-degree murder. Her family claimed that they had always known. Tony stated, quote, "When I shook his hand and felt how he was shaking, I knew then I was shaking the hand of the last person who saw Kenia alive." Travis had looked Tony in the eye, stood beside him, and even taken him to the gas station where his daughter had been brutally attacked and taken from them. Knowing what he had done, he had cried to the media, he had cried to Tony, he had cried to his girlfriend, claiming that Kenia had ruined his life by walking off with a stranger who didn't even exist. He fully put the blame and said all these awful things about this 19-year-old girl, knowing good and well that he was the one who took her life. Travis tried to say that this was an accident, that he never meant it, he never planned to kill her. He insisted that he had genuinely been trying to help her, a good Samaritan. But based on everything I just said, along with all the details of his crime, authorities just were not believing that. His criminal history began at a very young age and already revealed a troubling obsession with women, their underwear, causing them harm. I mean, he was throwing rocks at women jogging for who knows what reason. He also knew he was being looked at in the presumed murder of Kenia and had an encounter with the police just hours before he went on to attack Lydia. And that didn't change his plans. He continued his attack. And speaking of, it seemed to be his plan that Lydia die in the fire he set. He attacked her knowing she might die the same way Kenia did. And he was okay with that. It was like he was emboldened that they hadn't tied him to Kenia, so he felt confident that he could attack again and get away with it. Travis was displaying all of the typical signs of a serial killer: escalating offenses and a need to chase the same thrill. Some of his girlfriends even came forward stating that during their intimate moments with Travis, he would undergo what they referred to as a transformation. I guess they would role play, but he kind of took it a step further and actually took on a whole new persona. It was beyond role playing, and this persona that he took on was one that involved inflicting pain on women, and he seemed to get immense pleasure from it. They could just tell that something wasn't quite right with Travis. He even said himself that he was happy he was caught and that Lydia survived, because if she hadn't and if he hadn't been caught, he was just going to do this again and again and again. So now you can see why I said in the beginning that this case is so frustrating, because so many people seem to come forward and say, yeah, we noticed all these strange things and nothing was done about it. Now, because he pled guilty to all charges in both cases, he did not have to have a trial, only a sentencing. And even then, he took the opportunity to pity himself. He made a statement to his friends and family saying, quote, "What I did was horrible and cowardly. It was a mistake. And I wish he stopped there, but of course he didn't." He continued saying, quote, "Please remember me as I was, not as the monster I have become." And then he admitted that he was evil. And again, all I can think is this is not a psychological thriller book. This is not a movie. Like, who is accused of murdering someone, attempting to murder someone else, and says, "Please remember me as I was." Like, that is the cheesiest, stupidest, most infuriating thing that I've heard in some time. Now, in a powerful moment, Lydia had a statement prepared. After spending weeks on life support, enduring endless rehabilitation, therapy, and surgeries, she temporarily even lost the ability to talk and had to relearn to do the most basic things. She still put together enough bravery and enough power to tell Travis that he hadn't won. Her statement read, quote, "Travis Forbes, you caused me no harm. You have taken nothing from me. My spirit, my soul, and my mind remain untouched. May you find peace in this life." Kenia's family watched as the man who had pretended to be a good Samaritan was sentenced to life in prison without parole for her murder, followed by 48 years for the attempted murder in Lydia's case. And for once, they felt like he no longer had total control. Everything had been on his terms, and now that privilege was stripped away from him. He had ran everyone in circles. He had created such a huge web of lies, and now all of it was unraveling, and he couldn't do a single thing about it. Travis's family was also present, and they personally apologized to Kenia's family, expressing their condolences, but Tony and Maria told him that it wasn't their responsibility. They were not to blame for their son's terrible choices, and there was no ill will toward them. But this was still not over yet. While Travis was now incarcerated, he would never see the light of day again. They had the answers. They had Kenia. They were able to bury her. There was still this frustration, as I'd mentioned in the beginning of this video, where time and time again, this could have been stopped. Further victims could have been saved from his horrible, horrible crimes. But there was only one person that could be held criminally responsible for one of those instances: Travis's girlfriend. Carrie Humphrey had provided him with a false alibi. Police stated that if she hadn't done that, they would have investigated him that much harder. They would have had reason to push further, and he likely would have been arrested before he could have ever touched Lydia. The lies people told, the charges people dropped, the ways people let him escape from his own actions makes me so crazy. Carrie was brought in October, so a while after Travis was actually arrested, and she was re-questioned again about the information she had originally given police, and unfortunately, she tried to lie and keep up with the charade, but eventually, they said they had GPS coordinates from phone data showing that she was lying. I mean, there was no way of getting out of it, and she finally confessed. Carrie told police that Travis had actually asked her to lie for him, to say that they were asleep from 3:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. on the 1st, and she did it without asking why. But even if she didn't ask why, she still knew at that point that he had been one of the last people with a missing woman. And it really does not take a lot of sense to start to question why someone's having you lie and provide them with an alibi for a time period in which there was a disappearance. Now, eventually, after she'd already provided him with the alibi, I guess he told her that he only asked her to do that because it looked bad that he didn't have one, but not for the reasons that I guess most would suspect, which is possibly being involved in the disappearance. Instead, he said that after she walked off with this Dan guy that is fake, obviously, we now know, he had gone to purchase weed and then fell asleep in his van. And so being on probation, which he was at the time, that's obviously not a good look. And so when she did finally get a reason, she thought she was lying for that, not because he was actually involved in Kenia's disappearance. Regardless of the reasons that she was told, the reasons that she gave, she still did it and had to face the music. So ultimately, she was charged with and pled guilty to 2 counts of false reporting, 1 count of attempting to influence a public official, 1 count of perjury. And she was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 4 years of probation, 2 hours of community services, and was required to seek mental health treatment. Since then, Kenia's family has worked hard to make a difference for the safety of children and women. They've started a nonprofit in Kenia's name to teach safety and help support families that are victims of true crime. Because like every other family I've ever encountered through doing this, all the years that I have, these families are thrown into the middle of this nightmare with no help. They don't know what to do, where to go, the right steps. And so the biggest thing they can do to benefit themselves and each other is to work together, to provide the support to other families going through something that no one ever thinks they're going to have to. They've made it a point to try to ensure that women are equipped to protect themselves and make the best choices possible. When you are young and experiencing independence, you really can feel like you're untouchable, like nothing bad could ever happen to you. You can get caught up in the heat of the moment and how fun things are and how free you feel, not realizing that there are people out there that see that. They are preying on it, and you can so easily become a victim. And so they want people to learn from Kenia's story. There's just so much to take from this one case on its own. Lydia has also gone on to make an incredible recovery. There was a massive fundraiser started to help her cover her astronomical medical bills. She went on to help teach women self-defense with the local police department, and she's continued to excel in life, teaching yoga, working hard to get her speech back. She underwent extreme jaw surgery, and I honestly hope that she is out there thriving, that this isn't something that she has to think of every single day. This is such a horrifying crime, and looking at Travis's behavior and and what he could have gone on to do makes me so thankful that while one life was lost and one was changed forever, that it never went beyond that. He specifically targeted these young, vulnerable women who were intoxicated. And, that further highlights his predatory behavior that had been obvious from even 17 years old. And I think that's what makes him so scary, is that this is something that he had with him his whole life. And he managed to kind of smother it out and hide it. Lydia's neighbor actually came forward to the media after his arrest, and she said that he reminded her of Ted Bundy, which is actually a comparison that a lot of people have made. He's this handsome guy with this charming facade, and he was luring women in with his smile and promise of help. And people that can do that are the ultimate predators. He was hiding perfectly behind this good guy persona. And again, that is just one of the many lessons to take from this case. You have to remain vigilant and protecting yourself. In the world that we live in now, you can't afford to be complacent when it comes to your safety. Trust your gut, don't go out alone, don't go out with crappy friends, have a plan in place, and do not get in giant white creepy vans. And also, as broken record as I may sound, see something, say something. This could have been so much worse. If he had not been caught, there is no doubt in my mind and by his own admission that he would have gone on to continue harming people. And I really hope that a few people involved in this case have had a big moment of reflection at all of the ways that they protected this man. They protected someone that they knew was not a good person. I'm so sick and tired of seeing people protect the crappiest of human beings. I don't care who they are to you. I don't care what version of them you like best. We have to stop ignoring these horrible dark sides of people. And all I can think of is that really cheesy and cliche phrase that is like all over Tumblr quotes. That's like, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. That fully applies to this. Kenia, her mom, her dad, they all worked so hard to give her the life that she had, to make sure she could move to America, to have more opportunity, to have a successful life. And it's shameful to me that she came here and instead was met by someone like Travis Forbes, the scum of the absolute earth. And I hope that her family does not carry any guilt in their heart. It's devastating and such a senseless loss. And my heart hurts so badly for her family and everyone who has to now wonder what she would have done with her life, what she would have become, all the amazing things that she would have accomplished. And it's so scary to see just how fast things can change. That one night of fun, something that you go into so innocently and thinking is going to be such a great time and an awesome experience. And it just takes me back to all of the things that I did when I was her age and how I thought I was having such a great time and it was so fun and so cool. And to see how horribly it can turn out, I just think it's a real kind of shocking reminder. And even as often as we may see it, I think there are still going to be moments we forget what can happen. We forget to make the best choices. We forget to protect ourselves. And so I hope that her story forever reminds people of her age and beyond. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you, because no matter how good you are, there's someone out there that sucks that wants to take that from you. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Kenia's story. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.